She was widowed at 31 and suddenly ruled the largest empire on earth. Courtiers doubted her. Nobles despised her. Commoners whispered she was cursed, even bewitched. This is the story of Mariana of Austria, the most inbred queen in European history. Mariana of Austria was born on December 24, 1634, in Vienna, Austria, inside the vast Hofburg palace. It was Christmas Eve. Midnight bells rang while servants moved quietly through frozen corridors. Snow piled against iron gates, and the stone eagles of the Habsburg dynasty stared out with wings stiff from frost. Inside, the air smelled of incense and something sharper, the iron scent of blood. A young woman had just given birth. Crimson stains marked the silk sheets, the price paid to continue Europe's most dangerous dynasty. In the midwife's hands lay a newborn girl. Her face was red from the fight to enter the world. To the courtiers, she was simply another princess in a long line. History would call her Mariana of Austria, the most inbred queen in European history. But this was no ordinary child. She was the future bride of her own uncle, and the final step in a bloodline turning against itself. Her bloodline was a maze. Centuries of marriages between uncles, nieces, and cousins. The knot was pulled so tight, it already carried the seeds of disaster. Her father, Ferdinand III, would be Holy Roman Emperor. Her mother, Maria Anna of Spain, was both his cousin and his niece through overlapping branches of the same family tree. The baby who drew her first breath was the product of strategy. Marriages stacked like bricks to keep power in one house. Doctors and priests murmured prayers of thanks. Yet even then, the child's face hinted at a family curse. The jaw sat a little too heavy for an infant. The lips pushed forward with a shape people at court knew too well, the Habsburg jaw. This was not an innocent newborn. It was the next chapter in a human experiment that Europe would pay for in blood. To understand Mariana's fate, you have to understand the Habsburg plan. For 3 centuries, they turned inward. While other rulers made alliances abroad, the Habsburgs married their own. Nieces to uncles, cousins to cousins, over and over again. The family tree bent into a circle and began to choke itself. Philip II of Spain married his own niece, Anna of Austria. Their son, Philip III, married his cousin, Margaret of Austria. And in time, Philip IV would take Mariana, his niece, the baby born tonight, as his wife. This wasn't family. It was an experiment. And the test subjects were their own children, sacrificed for power. Strategy, not accident. But the cost was paid by their children. Fragile, short-lived, and often malformed. For now, none of this mattered to the people in that room. The midwife lifted the infant. Courtiers bowed. To them, the child proved. God favored the dynasty. Painters would soften the jaw, smooth the lips, and send glowing portraits across Europe as propaganda that said, "This is strength." But beneath the paint was a different truth. Signs of degeneration that later physicians would name and measure. Mariana grew in Vienna, surrounded by maps and whispers. Her nurseries held toys and tiny ghosts. Infant mortality was common in all of Europe, but in Habsburg halls it felt like a steady drum. Babies arrived weak, skulls swollen with fluid, spines twisted, bodies too fragile to last the year. Scribes wrote natural causes or God's will, but the pattern screamed something darker. The family had pushed blood too far, past the breaking point. Compared with many cousins, Mariana seemed healthy. Still, observers noted her pale skin and the features that even the best painters could not hide completely. The heavy jaw, the soft drooping lids, the receding chin. At court, these were praised as marks of noble blood. In time, doctors would call them what they were, signs of a line that folded in on itself too often. Her childhood was not play, it was preparation. In long rooms lined with maps, men pushed markers across Europe and spoke about children as if they were cities. Mariana wasn't a girl in their plans, she was a contract. Her womb was the field where the next battle would be decided. Before she could walk with confidence, her betrothal was arranged. Her future husband would be Philip IV of Spain, her own uncle. Vienna, 1649. Mariana was 15. She stood before the altar in a dress so heavy it dragged on the stone floor. But her groom, her own uncle, King Philip IV of Spain, was not there. Instead, a Spanish ambassador spoke Philip's vows on the king's behalf. This was a marriage by proxy, a legal ceremony without the husband present. Imagine it, you're 15, your groom is your uncle, and he doesn't even show up. An ambassador recites his vows while invisible chains lock around your wrists. A niece became a bride. The dynastic circle pulled tighter. The road to Madrid was long. Mountains fell away to plains. Plains gave way to the dry, hard country of Castile. She arrived and something ended. Austrian servants were dismissed. New faces bowed at the perfect angle, eyes cool and measuring. In Spain, queens were relics. They were carefully displayed, carefully preserved, and never free. Mariana learned the steps of the dance, how deep to bow, when to smile, how to hide fear with grace. The whispers began quickly. People remembered the king's earlier children, infants who died before they learned to speak, children who faded like candlelight. They studied Mariana's face. Pale skin, soft jaw, heavy lids. They called these noble traits. But everyone understood what they might mean. The nursery became the true throne room. Spain needed a son, and all of Europe watched Mariana's belly like generals watching a battlefield. This was not just motherhood, it was war. Every cradle was a battlefield, every cry a gamble for Spain's survival. In 1651, her first child was born, a daughter named Margaret Teresa. She survived into childhood, a rare joy for the dynasty. 4 years later, in 1655, another daughter arrived, Maria Ambrosia. She died within months. The court spoke gently of natural frailty, but the pattern was already clear. Then, in 1657, a son at last, Philip Prospero. Hope exploded across Spain. Bells rang, painters spread his image, and the empire dared to believe in the future. But 4 years later, his small coffin passed through Madrid in silence. Soon after, in 1658, another boy was born, Ferdinand Thomas. He did not live to see his first birthday. One by one, the coffins piled high. Not rebels, not enemies, but children. Spain's greatest war was being fought in the nursery, and it was already lost. In 1661, a new son was born, Charles. He lived. But even in the cradle, something was wrong. His body seemed twisted. His jaw jutted too far. His development lagged. Nurses and priests hung charms and relics as if they could push back a curse. Some called him blessed. Others whispered bewitched. He survived. But survival was not a victory. It was a warning. This fragile boy would one day wear the crown, and Europe would pay the price. Later, he would be known as Charles II, El Hechizado, the Bewitched. Survival was not victory, it was a warning. In 1665, the royal chambers glowed with candlelight. King Philip IV of Spain was dying. His 31-year-old queen, Mariana, was left a widow, and the mother of his fragile heir, the 4-year-old Charles. With the king's death, the crown passed to the boy, but the burden of rule fell on her. Mariana of Austria became regent of the largest empire on earth, ruling in her son's name until he was old enough to govern. From Madrid to Mexico, from Naples to Manila, Spain was still vast, even as it began to crack. In the council chamber, old grandees bowed, but with resentment. To them, she was foreign. She was a woman. But the law, the king's will, and the bloodline said otherwise. Mariana signed decrees. She appointed ministers. She carried the weight of an empire, but every signature was a battle. Every decree felt like a dare. Could a foreign widow truly hold Spain together? Or would the empire tear itself apart under her hand? Mariana's first move as regent shocked the court. She elevated her own confessor, Juan Everardo Nithard, an Austrian Jesuit priest, to chief minister. To Spain's nobles, this felt like foreign interference, an outsider placed above them by a foreign queen. Meanwhile, the empire itself was under pressure. To the north, Louis XIV of France pushed against Spanish lands in the Low Countries, testing the weakened monarchy. To the west, Portugal fought to break free after decades under Spanish control. And at the center of it all was a fragile boy, Charles II, Mariana's young son and the new king. He was heir to the empire, but already his health and deformities raised doubts. Could this child, so weak in body, ever truly rule Spain? Every eye in Europe watched that child, because if he failed, the empire itself would collapse like glass. Mariana stayed steady. She wrote to her brother, Leopold I of Austria, balancing loans and treaties to hold the empire together as its edges frayed. But danger grew inside the palace walls. Her greatest rival was Don Juan of Austria the Younger, the illegitimate son of her now-deceased husband, Philip IV, and half-brother to her son Charles. Unlike Mariana, Don Juan was Spanish-born, male, and already a celebrated military hero. To the nobles, he looked like the strong leader Spain needed. To the people, he felt like the true heir. Crowds filled the streets, shouting, "Down with the Austrian!" Pressure built. Bishops denounced Nithard's influence. Crowds raged against the Austrian priest who held too much sway. To avoid civil war, Mariana let him fall. Nithard was dismissed and carried out of Madrid under a storm of insults. But removing Nithard did not end the fight. It only shifted the battlefield. The next clash would be for Spain's very soul. In his place, she raised Fernando de Valenzuela, a Spanish courtier of humble birth who was loyal to her. He was not the noble's choice. They saw him as an upstart, unworthy of power. But to Mariana, he was safe, Spanish, and someone she could control. Through the 1670s, Madrid lived in a whisper of siege. Rumors of assassination swirled. Guards watched guards. Mariana learned to speak in layers and smile like a shield. In the palace, every shadow looked like a blade. Every whisper felt like the spark that could ignite a civil war. But no art of rule could change one fact. The king himself was failing. Charles II grew older but not stronger. Reports spread that Spain's young king could only walk with help, that his tongue was too large for his mouth, his teeth could not meet, and his jaw jutted in the final brutal shape of a bloodline bred too close for too long. He suffered seizures and stomach illness. He learned, but slowly. Crowds cheered when he appeared in public, not out of joy, but because silence would mean admitting what everyone already feared. Spain's king may never truly rule, and Spain may have no future. They didn't cheer out of hope, they cheered out of fear. Because if Charles was broken, then Spain itself was already broken too. In 1677, Spain's power struggle exploded. Don Juan of Austria the Younger, Charles's half-brother, marched on Madrid at the head of an army. His goal was clear: drive Mariana out and take control of the crown's government himself. This was no court intrigue anymore. It was open war. The only son of a king stood at the gates of Madrid, ready to take Spain by force. To spare the capital from battle, Mariana retreated to Toledo. Don Juan entered Madrid in triumph and became chief minister. For a moment, it seemed her rule was over. But 2 years later, Don Juan died suddenly. Illness or poison, no one knows. Once again, Mariana outlasted a rival. Yet her victory was bitter. The boy at the center of it all, King Charles, was now a young man, and weaker than ever. By the late 1670s, the search for an heir turned desperate. Mariana knew her son must marry to secure the dynasty. In 1679, Charles took his first bride, Marie-Louise of Orléans, niece of France's king, Louis XIV. She brought warmth and the promise of fresh blood for the line. But after 10 years, no child was born. In 1689, she died young. Public mourning hid a private truth. There was relief, because now there was a second chance. That same year, Charles married again. His new queen was Maria Anna of Neuburg, chosen from a family famous for fertility. But when she entered the palace, she found not a husband, but a shadow. Charles was frail, his jaw massive, his speech broken, his spine bent. Physicians bleed him, prod him, and prescribe rituals. Priests ordered processions and prayers. Nothing changed. No heir was born. Spain's last hope for survival was locked in that marriage bed, and every empty cradle was another nail in the dynasty's coffin. By the 1690s, Europe had stopped waiting for an heir from Charles II. Instead, foreign powers began planning for Spain without one. Ambassadors wrote home like accountants dividing an inheritance. France, Austria, and England each sketched out maps of how Spain's empire might be carved apart. Spain was no longer seen as an empire. It was a carcass, and the vultures of Europe circled hungrily overhead. From behind the palace walls, Mariana still pulled strings. Though no longer regent, she remained the king's mother and closest advisor, her influence stretching across every council table. Letters crossed her desk that spoke of partition like knives. She played her last card, diplomacy by blood, arguing that only another Habsburg should inherit Spain to keep it safe from the French. The irony was cruel. The very blood that had doomed Spain was now her only weapon to save it. By the 1690s, the truth was undeniable. King Charles II was infertile. His queen, Mariana of Neuburg, bore no children. The court whispered, "Is it the queen's fault, the king's, or was it God's punishment?" But doubt had already turned to certainty. The Habsburg line in Spain was finished. This was not what the dynasty wanted. For centuries, every marriage and every sacrifice had been meant to keep the crown in Habsburg hands. Now Spain's greatest enemy was not France, not England, not rebels. It was the king himself, a man whose broken body was the final sum of centuries of inbreeding. In 1696, winter winds lashed the Alcazar of Madrid. Inside, Mariana of Austria lay dying at 62. On her walls hung portraits of children who never lived long enough to rule, daughters who never became mothers, sons carried to the grave, and one boy who survived, Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain. She outlived her rivals. She outlived her husband. She even outlived her own children. But she could not outlive the curse of her bloodline. Mariana died before the final act. She would not see the War of the Spanish Succession that followed, nor the crown pass into Bourbon hands. She died still hoping for a miracle that never came. Her funeral wound through Madrid under black velvet and golden torches. People whispered prayers. They remembered the Austrian girl who married her uncle, and the widow who kept their world from breaking apart, at least for a while. She was buried at El Escorial, the vast stone heart of Habsburg memory. Mariana of Austria is remembered as the most inbred queen, but she was also a survivor who held Spain together as it fell apart.